What's the most entitled thing a family member has demanded from you? After 7 months of failed attempts, my husband Kyle and I announced we were finally pregnant. Everyone erupted with cheers except my sister Jacqueline, who smashed her wine glass against the marble counter. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You know how long I've been trying for a baby. I deserve to be first." Mom tried telling her 19-year-olds aren't ready for a baby, but Jacqueline wouldn't back down. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, yelling that I'd better abort my baby within 1 week or she was calling the police. The next morning, she showed up at our door with printed pages from abortion clinics, shoving them into Kyle's chest while he was still in his boxers. I made appointments for her at 3 different places. She announced to our entire cul-de-sac. She just needs to pick one. When Kyle tore up the papers, she called the whole family demanding an emergency intervention. That Sunday, 23 relatives crammed into Mom's living room while Jacqueline stood at the fireplace like she was delivering a TED Talk on why I was destroying her life by having a baby first. She actually had a PowerPoint. Our Uncle Jeffrey, a lawyer, finally told her there's no legal precedent for forcing someone to abort because you want to be pregnant first. She pointed at me with tears streaming down her face, said if I didn't terminate by Monday, she'd never speak to any of us again. We called her bluff. All 23 of us basically told her, "See you, Felicia." She left sobbing, and we didn't hear from her for a long while. Then, 7 months into my pregnancy, we were having our baby shower when the door flew open. Jacqueline. She walked in with her hand on a massive belly, wearing a shirt that read "First Grandchild Loading." Everyone went silent. Mom dropped her cake knife. "Surprise. I'm almost due," she announced, spinning around so everyone could see. "I got pregnant right after that horrible meeting where you all betrayed me. I'm 10 weeks out." Nobody was impressed, and when I decided to mess with her and mentioned my due date was 8 weeks away, her face went deep red. She grabbed my arm and hissed that the dates didn't matter because she'd make sure hers came first, then left before anyone could respond. My mom called that Tuesday, bawling. She'd found out from Jacqueline's roommate that Jacqueline had been taking black market labor induction substances bought off some website in Romania, risking her baby's life just to deliver before me. Now Jacqueline was in the ICU, but not because of the substances. Turns out she'd found some girl on Craigslist whose mother had been a midwife in the Philippines and paid her to perform a C-section in her living room. The girl kept refusing, said Jacqueline was only 31 weeks along, but my sister threatened to do it herself with kitchen knives if she wouldn't help. They ended up using box cutters sterilized with vodka. Jacqueline lost so much blood the neighbors saw it seeping under the apartment door. The baby somehow came out alive, purple and barely breathing. Both of them nearly died in the ambulance. He went straight to the NICU on a ventilator. Jacqueline needed a full hysterectomy. She'd never have another child. The first thing she did when she came to was call me from her hospital bed. "You did this," she gasped through the oxygen mask. "My baby is dying because you couldn't wait until I had a child." The craziest part was that with her now fighting for her life, the family split down the middle. Half thought she'd lost her mind. The other half actually thought I should have delayed announcing my pregnancy to spare her feelings. One aunt even said I should have just aborted. But everyone agreed on one thing. We all needed to be there for the sick baby. My own pregnancy got pushed to the side. Didn't bother me too much, honestly. My baby was mine and my husband's, not my mom's. Just got tiring how anytime I mentioned something exciting, the conversation kept getting redirected. 3 days before my due date, I was admitted for monitoring. Jacqueline's baby was still critical. The doctor said the next 48 hours would decide whether he'd survive. The scariest part was catching Jacqueline through my doorway, standing in the hall between the NICU and maternity ward, not looking at the rooms or the passing nurses, but staring directly at my belly with an expression I'd never seen on her before. They were inducing me the next morning. Jacqueline knew the exact time. She'd been quietly asking nurses about delivery room locations and whether babies were ever left unattended. The NICU sat 1 floor below maternity. If her baby didn't make it through the night, I had no idea what she'd do when mine was born healthy the next morning. The clock read 3 a.m. when I woke to Kyle's voice in the dark, already on the phone with someone about Jacqueline asking nurses where babies get taken after delivery. He paced by the window explaining she'd been watching the hallways, timing how long nurses stayed in each room. The charge nurse on the line promised to add a special security code to my chart immediately and alert the whole night shift. Kyle wasn't satisfied, his voice climbing as he demanded specific names of who would protect us and exactly what they'd do if Jacqueline tried to get near our baby. Hands shaking, he wrote names on the hospital notepad, asked about door locks and panic buttons, whether security could physically stop someone from entering our room. The nurse tried to calm him down, but he insisted on a meeting with hospital security before my induction started at 8 a.m. Within the hour, Francis Bergman showed up wearing a security supervisor badge and carrying a thick folder of protocols. He walked us through every safety measure they had, pictures of the electronic badges tracking everyone's location, the infant security tags that would trigger an automatic lockdown if anyone tried to remove them or move a baby past certain doors. He had me send him the clearest photo I had of Jacqueline so he could circulate it to every guard on every shift. He showed us the dedicated officer assigned to the maternity ward and gave us his direct number, promising hourly check-ins once labor started. At 5 a.m., someone knocked, and Olympia Hicks from Social Services came in with a clipboard full of forms, explaining she needed to document every threat Jacqueline had made in case CPS got involved. She sat in the stiff visitor chair asking detailed questions about every interaction, every threat, every mention of our baby, while my face burned with embarrassment having to explain my family's mess to a total stranger. She walked me through the process for an emergency restraining order, said she could start the paperwork right then, that a judge could issue it before the baby was even born. My phone buzzed nonstop as Mom apparently told the whole family group chat about the security measures we'd requested. Half my cousins thought I was overreacting to normal new mother stress. The other half started sharing stories I'd never heard about times Jacqueline had scared them or gone unstable when things didn't go her way. My aunt sent 3 paragraphs about Jacqueline keying her car once after not being invited to a high school party. My cousin mentioned finding Jacqueline going through her purse at Christmas looking for birth control pills to toss. Uncle Jeffrey sent a private text saying he knew a detective, Cyrus Powell, who specialized in cases like like this and could fast-track a police report if we needed one. I hesitated, worried about making everything worse, turning this into a bigger family war. But Kyle grabbed my phone and typed "yes please" in all caps before I could stop him. A nurse rushed in looking worried, told us Jacqueline's baby had taken a bad turn overnight, his oxygen levels dropping so low they'd had to increase ventilator support and add more medication. Said the NICU team was doing everything they could, but the next few hours were critical. Despite everything Jacqueline had done, my chest tightened thinking about that tiny baby struggling to breathe because his mother couldn't wait 2 more months. The morning shift nurse came in at 7 and walked us through the whole delivery room setup, pointing out on a map where each nurse would be stationed, emphasizing babies were never left alone, not even for a second. She showed us the matching ID bands with special numbers that had to match exactly or alarms would sound, and promised, genuinely concerned, to personally stay with us through the entire delivery, however long it took. I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote down exactly 4 names of people allowed to visit Kyle, Mom, Uncle Jeffrey, Kyle's mother, and handed it to Francis with very specific instructions that nobody else should even be told what room we were in or whether the baby had been born. Francis took it seriously, had me initial next to each name, asked for physical descriptions so his team could verify identities before letting anyone through. Kyle pulled me into the bathroom and shut the door, his whole body shaking, admitting he was terrified he'd freeze up if Jacqueline actually showed up during delivery, that he wouldn't be able to protect us when it mattered. He kept saying he should be stronger, should have seen this coming and stopped it before it got this bad. We held each other in that tiny hospital bathroom, promising we'd protect each other and our baby no matter what, his heart racing against my chest as we both tried not to cry. The bathroom door opened and Francis was standing there with his clipboard. Jacqueline had just tried getting past the main security desk using a visitor pass from the day before, telling guards she needed to check on her baby, but they recognized her from my photo and walked her straight to the NICU waiting area with a warning about restricted access. She'd argued with them the whole way, insisting she had a right to see me as my sister, but they held firm and told her one more attempt meant removal from the hospital entirely. Kyle squeezed my hand harder as Francis explained they'd now stationed someone specifically to watch for her near every maternity ward entrance. I could barely process it before Olympia knocked and came in right behind him with a stack of official-looking, scary papers. She sat on the edge of the bed, started filling out mandated reporting forms, explaining every threat Jacqueline had made against my unborn child was going into an official record that would trigger automatic CPS review once the baby arrived. Her pen moved fast across the pages as she asked for specific dates and times, writing down everything: the wine glass, the abortion clinic papers, yesterday's hallway staring. The paperwork felt both reassuring and deeply sad this was really happening. My own sister, documented as a threat to my child. Olympia kept her voice calm and professional, but I saw her jaw tighten when I described Jacqueline grabbing my arm at the baby shower, whispering about making sure hers came first. She copied everything and handed me a case number, said it would follow Jacqueline even after she left the hospital, creating a paper trail if anything else happened. Mom showed up while Olympia was still there, looking like she hadn't slept in days, crying the second she saw all the official paperwork spread across my bed. Kept saying she was sorry for the family pressure, that some relatives were taking Jacqueline's side, but in the same breath said she couldn't choose between her daughters and hoped I understood. I told her she didn't have to choose, she just had to respect my boundaries and keep Jacqueline away from us. She nodded, but I could see in her eyes she didn't really get it. Kept looking at the CPS forms like they were weapons I was using against Jacqueline instead of protection for my baby. My phone rang. Detective Cyrus Powell, Uncle Jeffrey's contact, confirming he was opening an investigation into the illegal surgery and needed details about any threats Jacqueline made before or after it. I put him on speaker so Kyle could hear too, giving him dates and times while Kyle held my hand, my early contractions already starting, my voice shaking as I tried to remember everything. Cyrus asked specific questions: who else had heard the threats, whether I had texts or voicemails saved, whether anyone had witnessed Jacqueline asking about delivery rooms and baby security. Said the illegal surgery case was solid, given the confession from the woman who performed it, but the threats against me would strengthen the overall case and might mean additional charges. A knock interrupted the call, a woman in a suit, the hospital's legal representative, needing me to sign forms creating an extra privacy lock on my medical chart. She explained that once signed, nobody could even confirm I was a patient here unless they were on my approved list. Not even other hospital staff could share my room number or condition. Small thing, but it made me feel more in control, knowing Jacqueline couldn't sweet-talk some random nurse into giving up information. Kyle grabbed a yellow legal pad from his backpack and started writing down everything that had happened over the past week, sick of re-explaining the whole story to every new nurse or doctor. Dates, times, exact quotes, a timeline running from the pregnancy announcement all the way to right now, Francis standing guard and Olympia's paperwork everywhere. When he finished, he made 3 copies down the hall, one taped inside my chart folder, one given to Francis, one kept in his pocket. The contractions were getting stronger and more regular, and the nurse checking on me noticed the crowd in the room and suggested we limit visitors to essential personnel only. Kyle stationed himself by the door like a bouncer, arms crossed, feet planted, and every set of footsteps in the hallway had us both tensing and turning toward the sound. Francis had to physically intercept Kyle's cousin Jefferson, who showed up phone in hand trying to FaceTime the delivery to share the joy with the whole family, including poor Jacqueline. Kyle's face went red. He told Jefferson to leave immediately or security would remove him, and I felt so grateful I'd married someone who understood our safety came before family politics. Jefferson argued everyone had a right to share the moment. Kyle just pointed down the hall and said one word: leave, and Francis escorted him to the elevator. Between contractions that had me white-knuckling the bed rails, Olympia explained we'd qualify for an emergency restraining order the moment the baby was born, legally keeping Jacqueline at least 500 feet away with no attempted contact. Kyle said yes instantly, without even looking at me, and Olympia started filling out more paperwork while I breathed through pain that was getting worse by the minute. A different nurse accidentally walked into our room instead of the one next door, and the mix-up triggered the infant security alarm, a shrieking, deafening sound that froze everyone. She explained afterward, apologizing, that the whole floor would go into lockdown within seconds if the alarm ever went off for real, doors locking automatically, security flooding the unit. After my initial panic at the noise, I actually felt reassured knowing they took baby safety seriously enough that even an accidental trip caused that kind of response. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Jacqueline was down in the NICU asking nurses about their break schedules, when shifts switched, whether babies were ever alone during those windows. The next contraction hit so hard I couldn't even respond. Just gripped the rail while Kyle read it aloud, his face going white. He stepped into the hallway. I heard him talking to someone. Then Cyrus walked in with a small black notebook, which he handed to Kyle, telling him to log everything with exact times and dates in case we needed it as evidence. Kyle started scribbling while I breathed through another wave. Contractions coming faster now. The nurse checked me and said it was time to move to the delivery room. They wheeled me down the hall, Kyle jogging alongside, still writing in that notebook, Francis walking ahead, checking every doorway. The delivery room was bright and cold. They ran through the security setup again, the matching wristbands, the special ankle tag that would trigger alarms if anyone tried to take the baby past certain doors. The anesthesiologist checked and adjusted my epidural while Kyle kept writing, his hands visibly shaking. The doctor arrived, checked me, said it was time to push, and suddenly the room filled with people, nurses prepping everything, one staying right beside me exactly as promised. I pushed and pushed while Kyle held my hand, pausing his notes just long enough to count with me and tell me I was doing great. Everything hurt, and I was scared but determined to get her here safely, pushing even when I thought I couldn't anymore. At 7:23 a.m., she came out screaming, and they laid her on my chest, wet and warm and perfect, Kyle crying, the nurse immediately snapping the security bands onto her tiny ankle and my wrist. For those few minutes, nothing else existed, just her face, Kyle's tears, the weight of her on my chest. They cleaned her up while she stayed on me, running all the necessary checks without ever taking her away, Kyle snapping photos through his own tears. Within an hour, they moved us to a recovery room way down at the end of the hall, past every other room, away from the elevators. Francis coming along to make sure our names weren't posted anywhere. No nameplate on the door. Francis confirmed the computer system listed us as private patients with restricted information. Kyle pulled the nurse aside and they worked out a code word. If we said pineapple, it meant take the baby to the locked nursery immediately. No questions asked. The head nurse wrote pineapple in red marker on the shift report and showed it to every nurse coming on duty. My phone kept blowing up with family demanding pictures, asking why we hadn't announced anything. Kyle grabbed it and typed one message to the group chat: we were taking private time to bond and wouldn't be sharing anything right now. The replies flooded and calling us selfish, dramatic. One cousin said we were punishing the family for Jacqueline's mistakes. Kyle turned my phone off, dropped it in a drawer, said we didn't need to deal with any of that right now. Cyrus knocked and came in with his notebook, asked for an official statement about all the threats, keeping it short since I was exhausted, still bleeding, trying to figure out breastfeeding. He mentioned the girl who performed the surgery had been questioned by police, and would definitely face charges for practicing medicine without a license and endangering a child. He left after about 10 minutes. And then Dr. Sanford came by with an update on Jacqueline's baby stable on the ventilator, but still critical. The next day would determine whether there was brain damage from being born so early and losing oxygen during that horrible surgery. I held my healthy daughter a little closer and felt sick with relief that she was okay, guilty for feeling that way while my nephew fought for his life a floor below. Dr. Sanford said Jacqueline kept asking about us constantly, and the psychiatric team was concerned about her fixation, but she was too weak to leave her bed, so we were safe for now. Kyle's mom texted that she'd seen something on social media, and when Kyle checked, there was a post from Jacqueline saying I'd stolen her thunder and ruined her life by refusing to wait my turn, tagged to every family member she could think of. The post had photos of her in the hospital bed, pale and sick, captions about how I'd forced her into desperate measures and now her baby might die because of my selfishness. Kyle screenshotted everything before she could delete it, added it to the evidence folder he'd started. Comments were already piling up, some defending her, saying we should have been more considerate, others telling her she needed serious help. Francis came back to tell us someone had been calling the nurse's station pretending to be different family members, trying to get our room number, but they couldn't provide the security code, so nothing was given out. 20 minutes later, a woman in a suit knocked, introduced herself as the hospital's PR representative, holding a folder of printouts from Facebook and local news sites. She sat next to Kyle's mom and explained someone had leaked details about the illegal surgery to Channel 7, and reporters were now calling the hospital for statements. She told us not to post anything online or talk to any reporters if they somehow got our numbers, handed us the hospital lawyer's card just in case. Kyle photographed everything she showed us, including a Facebook post from someone claiming to be a nurse there, describing the crazy sister who did her own C-section. The PR woman left after making us promise 3 times we wouldn't engage with any of it. Olympia knocked about an hour later carrying a thick folder, looking more serious than before. She pulled a chair close and explained CPS had to open an investigation given how Jacqueline's baby was born, and needed statements from everyone who knew about her threats. She kept saying we weren't being investigated, just witnesses, but needed every single thing Jacqueline had said about taking my baby or hurting herself. I told her about the intervention and the PowerPoint and the baby shower, Kyle filling in details I'd forgotten, exact words Jacqueline had used. Olympia wrote it all down, asked about texts or voicemails, which Kyle pulled up immediately. She photographed everything, including the social media screenshots, said this would help protect both babies going forward. After she left, Kyle went to talk to the nurses about visitor protocols and came back upset. Someone had called 7 times in the past 2 hours claiming to be his mother, trying to get our room number, but kept failing the security question. His actual mother was sitting right there beside me the whole time, holding our daughter, looking just as worried as we were. The charge nurse followed right behind him, said they were overhauling everything immediately, and Francis would handle it personally. Within the hour, Francis was back with a whole new system: visitor badges requiring photo ID, matching wristbands that changed color daily. He showed us the new list, where he'd personally verify every visitor and walk them to our room instead of letting anyone wander the halls. He also moved us to a different room at the very end of the hallway, one way in, cameras covering the entire corridor. Kyle's mom helped us pack while the baby slept in her bassinet, and we settled into a space that felt more like a bunker than a hospital room. Mom showed up the next morning with red eyes and shaking hands. She sat on the edge of my bed, asked if she could bring Jacqueline for just 5 minutes to meet the baby. Maybe seeing her would snap Jacqueline back to reality, help heal the family, to make her realize what she'd done. I looked at Kyle, then back at Mom, and told her, absolutely not, there was no way Jacqueline was coming near my daughter after everything she'd threatened. Mom started crying harder, said I was being cruel, tearing the family apart, but I didn't chase after her when she left. Just held my baby closer and focused on feeding her while Kyle rubbed my back. My phone rang Cyrus with an update. He said Sterling Waite had given a full statement about finding Jacqueline bleeding on the bathroom floor and calling 911, and the woman who did the surgery had confessed to everything. Told police Jacqueline had threatened to hurt herself if she didn't help. Showed them texts where Jacqueline said she'd use kitchen knives if necessary. Cyrus said the evidence was overwhelming. Charges would definitely be filed once the prosecutor reviewed everything, probably within the week. He mentioned Jacqueline might face charges too once she was mentally stable enough to stand trial, but that could be months away. Olympia came back that afternoon with a different folder and a gentler expression. Said she needed to do a postpartum mental health screening with me, which felt strange since we both knew my stress wasn't ordinary new mom stuff. She asked about sleeping, eating, crying, then acknowledged what I was going through was well beyond typical, and wanted to connect me with someone who could help. She'd already arranged for a trauma therapist to see me the next day, right in the hospital room, so I wouldn't have to leave the baby. While she finished her notes, my phone buzzed with a text from my aunt saying I should publicly apologize for the sake of family unity. I didn't respond, just showed Kyle, who grabbed my phone and blocked her number, muttering something about people being insane. Francis burst through the door looking angry and out of breath. Someone had tried to get onto our floor using a visitor sticker stolen from the cardiac unit, but security caught them at the elevator when they couldn't answer basic questions about who they were visiting. The person ran before anyone could grab them, but we all knew who it probably was, even if Francis couldn't say so for legal reasons. Kyle stood up and said enough was enough, asked Cyrus to come back immediately. When he arrived, Kyle had already printed everything the security footage Francis had shared. Every screenshot, every text, every threat. They sat at the little table in my room filling out paperwork for an emergency restraining order while I nursed the baby, trying not to cry. Cyrus said the judge would hear our case the next morning by video conference, so I wouldn't have to leave the hospital, and based on the evidence we'd definitely get at least a temporary order. Kyle held my hand while Cyrus explained the order would keep Jacqueline at least 500 feet away, banning contact through any means, including other family members. The door opened and Dr. Sanford walked in, clipboard in hand, looking less worried than before. She sat down and explained Jacqueline's baby was doing better than yesterday, actually breathing over the ventilator for a few minutes at a stretch. The numbers on his charts were creeping up, not a miracle recovery, but real progress. I held my daughter closer, feeling this weird tangle of relief and guilt, because I'd been praying for that baby even though his mother wanted to hurt mine. Kyle squeezed my shoulder while Dr. Sanford pointed to the improving oxygen levels. About an hour later, a different woman knocked, badge reading Child Protective Services. She sat down with a thick folder and asked whether we'd considered taking Jacqueline's baby, if he survived, since he might not be able to go home with her given the ongoing criminal investigation. My whole body went cold. Kyle was already shaking his head. She kept talking about kinship placement and family preservation while I felt like I couldn't breathe. I'd given birth the day before, and now they wanted me caring for a sick, premature infant whose mother was actively threatening us. Kyle stood and told her, firmly but politely, that we needed to focus on our own newborn, that taking on a medically fragile infant while dealing with ongoing threats would be dangerous for everyone involved. She wrote something down, said she understood but had to document that she'd asked. I started crying from sheer relief that Kyle had said what I couldn't get out. My phone rang 20 minutes later, Mom, sobbing, begging us to reconsider the kinship placement, saying it was the only way to keep the baby in the family and maybe help Jacqueline hold on to her sanity. I told her there were other relatives who could step up, siblings and cousins who didn't have a newborn of their own and weren't being actively threatened. She said none of them would do it, that we were the baby's only chance. But I had to hang up. I couldn't handle the guilt trip on top of everything else. Francis burst through the door about an hour later with 2 other guards behind him, Jacqueline between them, screaming at the top of her lungs about us stealing her baby's only family and destroying her life on purpose. She'd somehow gotten all the way to our room before they caught her. Other patients peeked out their doors looking terrified while she kept yelling that we were murderers and thieves. Francis and the guards dragged her toward the elevator, still kicking and screaming. I felt horrible for every other new mom on that hall having to deal with the chaos. A psychiatrist showed up within 30 minutes, asked us what had just happened before going to evaluate Jacqueline. He came back 2 hours later and told us she was showing signs of postpartum psychosis compounded by trauma from her baby's condition and the consequences of her own actions. He'd already started paperwork for an involuntary psychiatric hold. She'd be transferred to the psych ward, unable to leave until doctors cleared her. The CPS worker came back that afternoon, clarified they were considering all options for the baby, including his father's family in another state, and that we weren't actually first choice. She just needed to document she'd explored every possibility. The relief hit so hard I nearly threw up. I I'd been imagining trying to care for 2 babies while constantly looking over my shoulder for Jacqueline. The next morning was our restraining order hearing, and they wheeled in a whole video setup so I wouldn't have to leave the room. The judge appeared on screen, reviewed all the evidence Cyrus had submitted, including the security footage and documented threats, asked a few questions about specific incidents, then granted a temporary restraining order keeping Jacqueline at least 500 feet away and banning contact attempts for 30 days, with the full hearing scheduled for the following month at the actual courthouse. Afterward, Kyle asked Francis to walk him through exactly what to do if the infant security alarm ever went off for real. They spent an hour running the whole drill, Francis showing him the secure areas and emergency procedures. Kyle practiced it over and over until he had it memorized, knew exactly where to go and what buttons to press. Watching him take it so seriously made me love him even more than I already did. That afternoon, I sat with my phone and recorded everything that had happened, from the very beginning, nearly 2 hours, going through every threat and incident with specific dates, times, details. I saved it in 3 places, sent a copy to Uncle Jeffrey, uploaded it to a cloud account Kyle set up specifically for evidence. Having my own record made me feel less helpless and more in control of what was happening to us. The discharge planner knocked the next morning with a thick folder and a worried expression, spread maps across my bed showing different routes home with certain streets highlighted in yellow, the ones most public, with the most cameras, in case we ever needed proof of something happening. Kyle photographed everything while she wrote down the direct number for police dispatch, one that bypassed regular 911 operators. She gave us cards for our neighbors, Jacqueline's photo attached, with instructions to call police if they saw her near our property. The whole thing felt like witness protection, not just taking our baby home. Francis stopped by while she was still there and added his personal cell to our emergency contact list, said he'd already talked to the neighborhood security company about extra patrols past our house. 3 days later, cleared to go home, Kyle spotted his cousin Jefferson sitting in a car in the visitor lot with a big camera. Francis checked the monitors, confirmed Jefferson had been there 2 hours already, waiting for us to come out. We packed our bags while Francis arranged for maintenance to bring a cart through the service hallways. The baby stayed wrapped against my chest under my jacket as we followed Francis down empty corridors I never knew existed. Through the hospital kitchen where staff barely glanced up from their prep work, Kyle carrying our bags, checking over his shoulder every few steps. The loading dock smelled like old garbage and diesel, but our car was already there. Engine running, Francis had moved it himself, using Kyle's keys so nobody would spot us in the regular garage. We strapped the baby in while Francis stood guard, then drove out the back exit that delivery trucks use. Kyle took 3 different turns checking his mirrors before finally heading toward our actual neighborhood. Jefferson never even knew we'd left, probably sat there another hour waiting for nothing. At home, everything looked exactly the same, but felt completely different knowing what we were up against. I jumped at the neighbor's dog barking, kept checking locks I'd already checked 5 minutes earlier. Every time the baby cried, I wondered if a noise outside had scared her. Kyle stayed up after I finally fell asleep, sitting by the window, phone ready to dial 911. We switched at 3 a.m. for a feeding, and I took the watch. Neither of us got more than 2 hours of sleep at a stretch those first few nights. Every passing car made us both freeze until it went by. The doorbell rang on our 3rd day home, and we both panicked until we saw Cyrus through the peephole. He came in with a box containing a security camera system paid for by some victim's fund, spent 2 hours installing it on our porch and showing us how to check the feed from our phones, positioning it to cover the whole front yard and sidewalk. While he worked, he photographed more of the threatening messages on my phone for the criminal case file, said the prosecutor was building a solid case for whenever Jacqueline was stable enough to face charges. The next morning, I found a cardboard box on the porch that hadn't been there the night before. The security camera showed Mom had left it at 5 a.m., still dark out. Inside were baby clothes from when Jacqueline and I were little, washed and folded perfectly. Her note said she loved us but needed time to process everything, that she'd respect our boundaries but hoped we knew she was thinking of us. I cried holding those tiny outfits, remembering when things were simple and Jacqueline was just my annoying little sister. That afternoon, my phone rang with the hospital's number, and my stomach dropped, thinking something had happened with Jacqueline. But it was Dr. Sanford, with an update on the baby. He'd started breathing on his own for 15 minutes at a stretch, and his brain scans looked better than expected, though they wouldn't know about delays until he was older. His prognosis had shifted from critical to serious but stable, which should have made me happy. Instead, I felt guilty for having half-wished he'd stay sick enough that Jacqueline couldn't use him against us somehow. 4 days later, Kyle's phone rang at 2 a.m., with an unrecognized number. The voicemail was Jacqueline's voice, shaky and furious, saying we'd destroyed her life and stolen her baby's future, rambling for 3 minutes about how we'd turned everyone against her and ruined her chance at motherhood. Kyle called Cyrus immediately, even at that hour, to report the violation. Cyrus said she must have used another patient's phone at the psychiatric facility, a serious breach. The restraining order hearing was that Friday, the judge appearing on our laptop screen from his courtroom. He reviewed the stack of evidence Cyrus had submitted, including the security footage and that week's voicemail, asked a few questions about specific incidents and whether we felt our safety was at risk. After 20 minutes, he extended the temporary order to a full year, with criminal penalties for any violation, making clear any contact attempt would mean immediate arrest once she was released from the psychiatric hold. The relief hit so hard I started shaking, and Kyle had to finish answering the judge's last questions for me. 2 weeks later, Olympia called to say they'd found placement for Jacqueline's baby with his father's parents in Oregon stable, financially secure, no criminal history or concerning behavior. They'd already started the interstate placement process, would take custody once he was medically cleared. She confirmed we were officially off the list of possible caregivers, which felt like a massive weight lifting. We felt guilty for the relief, but also knew we couldn't have handled that on top of everything else. Kyle scheduled a video call with the extended family that Sunday to set clear boundaries going forward. 23 relatives joined, though half had their cameras off. Kyle did most of the talking. One monthly update email, no responses to individual texts or calls, no surprise visits, and anyone who shared information with Jacqueline would be cut off completely. Most agreed, though Aunt Chloe kept saying we were being too harsh on someone who was clearly sick. Uncle Jeffrey backed us up, reminded everyone mental illness didn't excuse criminal behavior or threats. The call ended in uncomfortable silence, but at least everyone knew where we stood. Mom called 3 days later to say she'd started therapy at the community mental health center and found a support group meeting every Tuesday for families dealing with a relative's mental illness. She drove herself to the first meeting that same week, sat in a circle with 12 other people who understood what it felt like to love someone whose brain worked differently. The therapist gave her worksheets on setting boundaries and recognizing enabling behaviors, which she actually filled out instead of shoving in a drawer. She started keeping a journal, writing down every time she'd made excuses for Jacqueline over the years, pages of incidents she'd once brushed off as teenage drama or sibling rivalry. The group leader explained how untreated mental illness can escalate, and Mom finally stopped blaming herself for not being able to fix everything with enough love and patience. Cyrus called that Friday while I was fighting with the breast pump, matter of fact, as he explained the unlicensed surgeon had taken a plea deal for practicing medicine without a license and child endangerment, 5 years in state prison, parole possible after 3, though Cyrus figured she'd likely serve the full term given the severity of what happened. He mentioned Jacqueline would face her own charges once doctors cleared her as competent to stand trial, which could take months, possibly a year, depending on her treatment. The prosecutor was building a case for reckless endangerment of a child, and possibly attempted murder if they could prove she'd known the risks to her baby. I found a new parents group at the library that met Wednesday mornings. 8 moms, babies under 6 months, sitting on yoga mats talking about diaper rash and whether organic formula was worth the extra money. Nobody there knew about my sister, the restraining order, or the baby fighting for his life in the NICU. They just saw another tired mom trying to figure out parenting. We compared swaddle techniques, traded pediatrician recommendations, took turns holding each other's babies during bathroom breaks or just a minute to drink coffee while it was still warm. The group leader brought coffee and homemade muffins. For the first time in months, I felt like a regular person. The psychiatric facility called Kyle to say they were transferring Jacqueline to a specialized long-term treatment center 2 hours away, focused on postpartum psychosis and trauma-related disorders. The intake coordinator explained she'd be there at least 6 months, possibly longer. No set discharge date until the treatment team felt she was stable enough for outpatient care. Strict visiting policies. All communication routed through the clinical team first, meaning the restraining order stayed in full effect even while she was hospitalized. The facility specialized in cases like hers, where criminal charges ran alongside mental health treatment, with security protocols to prevent unauthorized departures. Dr. Sanford caught us in the hospital parking lot at our 2-week checkup, fresh from checking on Jacqueline's baby in the step-down nursery. She explained his brain scans showed some areas of concern that would likely mean developmental delays, though the full extent wouldn't be clear until he was older and hitting milestones. The grandparents from Oregon had arrived and were learning to manage his feeding tube and monitor his oxygen for when they could finally bring him home another month or 2 out. She handed us a photo. They'd asked her to share a tiny baby in a onesie reading Little Fighter. Tubes and wires everywhere but eyes wide open. Looking exactly like Jacqueline had in the baby pictures Mom kept on the mantle. Kyle sat down that night with his laptop and set up a family communication system, a weekly group email with basic updates on the baby and nothing else. No individual texts or calls unless it was an actual emergency. No discussion of Jacqueline's situation unless it directly affected our safety. No photos posted anywhere she might someday see. He set up an auto response for anyone trying to reach us outside the weekly email, politely pointing them back to the boundaries we'd set. It felt cold, but necessary space to just be new parents without constant family drama, while keeping a thread of connection for the relatives who'd actually respected the boundaries. I pumped extra milk every morning, and Kyle would drive it to the hospital in a cooler marked for the NICU donation program, along with the preemie clothes we'd bought just in case our daughter came early. The NICU coordinator never asked who it was for, but I think she knew gave Kyle a small nod of understanding every time he dropped supplies at the desk. We never visited Jacqueline's baby directly, but this felt like the right amount of help, supporting an innocent kid without putting ourselves back in danger. During a 2 a.m. feeding, the house completely silent except for the white noise machine, I held my daughter against my chest and felt her tiny heartbeat while she drank. The family drama wasn't fixed and probably never would be, not completely, but we'd built walls around our little family strong enough to protect her from the chaos. My phone sat quiet on the nightstand, no angry texts, no guilt-trip voicemails, just peaceful darkness and the soft sound of my baby breathing. That's a wrap for now. Thanks for hanging out and going through all these details with me. Until next time, subscribe for more content like this.